Hey everyone, welcome to the Call to Fem podcast. It's Josh here, and we're going to continue a brief study on Tehom/the Chaos Waters. So unfortunately, we don't have Caleb here today, but I hope that this brief little podcast will still be informative as we continue to look through the discussion of the Chaos Waters and the Tehom. And so we're going to look at another psalm that looks back on the Torah, which is a couple other places you can look at the Torah where it uses the word Tehom, and obviously Mayim and Yam and some other words. But considering that we're trying to make sure we have a good anchor with this one of Tehom, we're going to be focusing on this word specifically for right now. And so we're going to use another passage in the Psalms that looks back on a Torah passage. And so that's going to be found in Psalm 78. To my teaching, incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from of old. Things that we have heard and known that our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, but to tell the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach to their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and arise and tell them to their children, so that they should set their hope in God and not forget the works of God and keep his commandments, and that they should not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God. The Ephraimites, armed with the bow, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant, but refused to walk according to his law. They forgot his works and the wonders that he had shown them. In the sight of their fathers, he performed wonders in the land of Egypt, in the fields of Zoan. He divided the sea and let them pass through it, and made the waters stand like a heap. In the daytime, he led them with a cloud, and all the night with a fiery light. He split rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink abundantly, as from the deep. So we're going to pause there because there's a lot of other verses to be read here. But I wanted to read the first few to give context. We can read the other all the way up to verse 72. It's a long psalm, but it's beautiful. It's really fascinating just as it reflects back on all the things that Israel has done. And the ways that, yes, it condemns people for how they've forgotten. It reminds them of all the things that he has done. And so we have here is this whole discussion about what God has done in Exodus. Caleb and I talked about before about how Genesis and Exodus are like the bedrock of the rest of the Torah and definitely for the rest of the Old Testament. It is the thing that they all basically comment on, like provide a commentary in some way on, looking back on these passages or using these passages to describe things. And so in verse 15 here, we have he splits rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink abundantly as from the deep. Now, I think some of us might know what passage this is, but there's a couple passages here, but just to give an example, you can find an example in Exodus 17, verse 6, where it says, Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, Is the Lord among us or not? And so God provides this water, this miracle, this life-giving water that they need. But what's interesting is how they use the fact that the source of the water is the Tehom. And so I want to kind of share some interesting thoughts I had about this, in that we've mentioned before numerous times about how Tehom or abusos is often used to describe this water, this chaos, this thing, this force, this description of the forces of chaos of which human beings have no control over. But we're going to talk about in our Chaos Monster series how they can be either overcome by, destroyed by, or they can give into the forces of chaos. And we're going to talk about that more in the Chaos Monster series. But what's interesting is how in this, we don't get that chaos. Because if you remember, in Genesis 1, it then describes the Tehom as the Mayim. It changes language there. Similarly, it does that in Exodus 14 and 15, where it switches language between Mayim, Tehom, and Yam. And I think that's really beautiful and really obviously intentional. And so we have here that the psalmist, the Psalm of Asaph, describes that the source of the water is the Tehom. Obviously, it's not referring to the water above, it's referring to the water that is beneath, the water that is holding up the ground, what the earth is floating on in some of these psalm passages. And so Tehom is being used here as like, looking back on how, if you look at other psalms, how God parted the Tehom so they could go through, which referring to the Sea of Reeds. They're describing it as like this decreation event, but also they're using it to describe as water that can preserve life when we trust in the Lord. How God may split the waters because there's nothing to him. And then we pass through into life, passing through chaos or avoiding chaos into life, into new creation. But then also how the forces of chaos, they're nothing against God. And so this water, the water of the depths of what is beneath them, God turns into a source of life for them in this passage. It provides them with water when they needed it. Provides them this miracle to show that he does provide. And so I think that's this beautiful thing how God can use. It's like in Genesis where it talks about Joseph, what man intended for evil, God intends for good. And of course, Tehom is not an intention of humanity. We can't control water. But God can take anything. He can take things and turn it into something that is going to bring him glory and provision for us. He turned the waters, which water is something that we need. It's an essential to humanity. It's essential to life. We need it to drink, to live, to be hydrated. We obviously can see that you will die and go into delusions if you don't have water. And how God took the water of the deep, the water of the depths, and he turned it into water. Again, because it's talking about how it is Mayim. I think that's just fascinating because if we go back to the Psalm passage, he divided the sea and let them pass through it and made the waters stand like a heap. In the daytime he led them with a cloud and all the night with a fiery light. He split rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink abundantly as from the deep. This is a description by Asaph about how God has taken so many forces of chaos, so many things that seem to be against Israel, and turned it into something that was good for Israel as a provision. And I mentioned the Mayim part because if you go to Exodus, it talks about how the Mayim comes out of the rocks. But if we see how all this is interconnected, God is taking something, providing a miracle, and then Asaph is describing how all these beautiful things that God has done, he's taken something that should have been in opposition, or was going to be in opposition, or presently was in opposition. The Sea of Reeds was an opposing obstacle that they had to go by, or else they're going to be killed by the Egyptians. But then he parts it, and they go through. And he describes that here, how he parts it. He parts the sea so they can go through. They know about the Exodus passage. They know the implications of what that means. But he's going on further saying, the water, not only that he split to let you go through, but the water that he provided you from the forces of chaos, from the depths, from that which was split in Genesis 1, so that you may have life. I just think this is kind of this really fascinating, beautiful thing of what is being described here. And I just kind of want to do a little brief sharing on this because in these next few passages, we're not going to be so much in the Torah, but we're going to be in verses that are using similar language. Some of it's still looking back on the Torah because the events of Genesis in Egypt were so huge and hugely referenced. Were so hugely referenced in Israelite literature throughout the rest of the Bible, throughout the rest of God's Word. But they start to also discuss other things. And so I wanted to use this, take this time to look back on these events at least one more time, just to kind of like reiterate some things. I think the beautiful idea of how God takes chaos and turns it into good, and that chaos is nothing in comparison to our God. And so I just wanted to share that with you guys today. It's a very short episode, and I hope you guys are doing well. We will see you guys in the next episode. God bless. Thank you so much for tuning in. We love you guys. Let us know if we're praying for you in the comments or by sending us an email in our bio, in our YouTube channel, and I believe in our podcast as well. God bless, guys.